Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Sean, sometimes known as The Beast, and I wanted to do something a little bit different. I've been thinking about trying to start some type of a mini series type thing on my channel, rather than just constantly showing either what I've just bought or what I've been listening to. This idea was inspired a few weeks ago. I was out in the garden doing some work, and I just put a classic death metal playlist on Spotify, and I was out there for quite a few hours, and there was certain tracks that had come on, and I knew the band, didn't really recognise the track, so I would stop what I was doing and pop in, oh yeah, it's so and so, so and so. And it got me thinking, having a big collection is in one way a blessing, because you've never not got something to listen to, but in other ways it can be a bit of a, oh, I'll just listen to this album, I'll listen to this album, and you sort of, well, I do certainly, I have my go-to album for a band. So what I was thinking of was, well, instead of going to said album, pick something else out of the discography that you just don't know as well. So that's the premise of it. So I'm going to start, because it was a death metal playlist that I was listening to initially to give them the idea. I thought I'd do 5 classic death metal bands, but not necessarily the go-to albums that I would normally choose. Hopefully, as it goes on, it'll make a bit more sense. It sounds right in my head, it just doesn't sound so good when it's going out the other end. So, first up is The Mighty Entombed, and their third full length, Wolverine Blues. This came out in 1993. This is the 2017 reissue, I think it was. 2017 on Earache Records. Obviously, as we all know, Entombed are from Sweden. Normally, if I feel in the mood to listen to Entombed, I always, or 99% of the time, I go for Clandestine. For me, that's one of the best death metal albums ever. So I thought, well, because I got into death metal as late as I did, I didn't have the, what's the word, there seems to be a lot of negativity towards the way the sound changed on this, and the death and roll approach to their music came about. What I think of this is, again, it's an album I know, but I didn't know really well until this past fortnight or so. I've been playing it a lot. The thing I love about this album is that, dare I say, melody that's throughout it. I mean, obviously you've still got the crunching guitars and the riffs for days, and LJ Petrov absolutely nailing his vocals on this, I believe. I think it's the voice, certainly that distinctive tone that his music's got, that his vocals have got, is really well suited to this style. One slight complaint is I fucking hate that logo. I don't know what made them decide to change it. I'm sure there's somebody with more knowledge than me who'll know why they changed it, but it's a slightly softer musical sound, but still ridiculously heavy, and it's got that what's the word, that sort of, there's like a flow to it that's quite catchy, quite upbeat, quite, it's just a pleasant listen. It's nothing, if you're not a fan of death metal, or you're potentially getting into death metal, it could be a sort of a gateway record. I mean, that might be a little bit thingy, but obviously the music itself, it's top notch. The riffs are superb. The drumming is solid as always without being overly elaborate or, you know, wankery or anything like that. The bass line's thick. It's just a really interesting change. I mean, there is a big change from this and Clandestine, which is, as I said, Clandestine's probably my favourite Entombed album. Probably one of my favourite death metal albums. But yeah, spending more time with this, as with all these to be honest, has certainly opened my ears to the difference and the nuances between my go-to album, as I keep saying, and one I don't listen to very much. So first one up, Entombed and Wolverine Blues. Now next one, I've got notes down here, so if I keep looking down I do apologise. It's not because I'm ignorant, it's just because I'm old and mental capacity is not where it used to be and I forget things. Next up is The Mighty Obituary. Their 1997 release, Back from the Dead. This is at the 5th full length out on Listenable Records. This is the 2018 reissue. Obviously, Obituary, Florida, that wonderful Floridian death metal sound that they have. Now, my go-to album for Obituary, probably no surprises, Slowly We Rot. It was the first one I heard by them and I still love it to this day. Now, this one is an album I very rarely play, and it just never clicked with me. Obviously we get the inlay card. Yeah, for some reason it's very much an album that's how would you best describe it? Yeah, it's got all the telltale Obituary like traits. Horrendous white vinyl. Yeah, it's got all the Obituary traits as in regards to the riffs and such like, but for me it's quite a very safe and, I won't say boring because I have enjoyed listening to it, but it's not something sort of uninspired, is that the right word maybe? It's like they put a record out thinking, yeah, we'll bang it out. Now, I don't know if there's anybody out there that knows why this was it maybe oh, we needed to put something out quickly, so we'll bang this out. The artwork on this is, again, it sort of looks like as if it was an afterthought, and for me personally with this album, it just sort of, it fits the music that's on it. I mean, it's you know, it's not. I'm not saying it's a bad album. It's a good album, but it's certainly it would never replace Slowly We Rot in my. I feel like listening to Obituary. Let's grab it. Yeah, it's an okay album. It's not the best, but it's sort of, you know, it's Obituary doing what they do, but it just lacks something. I'm not quite sure what it is, and that sort of explains why this is an album that I don't listen to very often. Pleased to have it in the collection, obviously, but yeah. So Obituary's Back from the Dead from 1997. It's an okay album, but it won't be one that gets spun regularly. Now, next up is an album that, again, I knew it, but it wasn't something that I would always gravitate to. My opinion has actually changed quite a lot this past fortnight, because this has been spanned a lot. The album in question is Dismember and their Massive Killing Capacity from 1995. This is the third full length. Originally it came out on Nuclear Blast. This is the 2023 version out of the Historia Mortis box set, which is sat there. I will pick it up because I don't think I've ever shown it on YouTube, but it's an absolute monster of a record box set to pick up. So happy to have been one of the fortunate ones to grab it. But yeah, so back to Massive Killing excuse me, Capacity. This is obviously Dismember, from Sweden. Go-to album, again, no great surprise, would be Like an Ever-Flowing Stream, which I would rate easily definitely in my top 5 death metal albums. The rawness and the savagery of that album is just something something a bit special. So yeah, this is the one I've spent the most time with this past fortnight, because there's just something something about the groove and the sort of the feel of it. It's I don't know if it's just one of those weeks where it's struck home or what, but I've really thoroughly enjoyed this. I did read a comment online that because it has that symbol on his head, it's classed as racist because it's warmongering and such like, and it's not what Dismember normally sing about. And it's one that, with it being the box set, they're either blue or yellow. This is the blue one, obviously. Yeah, which sort of made me chuckle quite a lot. I think the interweb and its many simpletons pick up on things that just there's no reason to pick up on them. But yeah, this has got it still has that obviously Swedish sound, but it's a bit of more of a sort of a fun vibe to it. It's still aggressive, it's still heavy, the riffs are still memorable and really catchy. I think the vocals on this have got a bit more of maybe a slight punk vibe at times. But yeah, this is an album I think that if I'm feeling a bit fed up and want something just to liven my spirits up, I think this one will probably be getting quite a lot more spins, because it's just a fun listen without being overtly aggressive or without being too smash your face in type stuff. So yeah, Dismember and their massive even killing capacity. So next up is a band that I probably consider my favourite death metal band. This is the mighty Autopsy and their 1992 release Acts of the Unspeakable. Again, it's to the 3rd full length. That is just pure coincidence. I haven't done that, it wasn't by design. I ain't that clever. This is the 2015 Reassure and Peaceful. Obviously Autopsy are from Auckland. Sorry, I forgot where they're from then. Normally my go-to album for Autopsy is Mental Funeral. That's quite simple, it's just a masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. Everything about it is just superb. So again, this is an album I did know and I have spanned quite a lot, but I've never really probably never delved into it as much as I should have done. Now, before I do these videos, I know it's hard to believe, but I do a little bit of research at times, and I like to read reviews that other people have done, see if they've made any like salient points that I can pick up on or I've maybe missed myself. I want to quote, I wrote this down because it made me giggle. One of the reviews on the Metal Archives Encyclopedia Metallum, however you want to call it, says this: gurgling, gargling, rattling, retching, vomiting. That's what comes to mind when listening to the vocals. Well, yeah, it's Chris Reifert. What do you expect? He's certainly not going to start singing like a fucking choir boy, is he? Just reading that made me, I think it got up at, the reviewer gave it something like 23% out of 100, so I'm guessing he's not the biggest Autopsy fan. Which did, as I said, when I was reading it, it proper made me giggle, thinking that someone would take the time to criticise Autopsy. It might have been the first thing they'd ever listen to, but I don't know. Anyway, this is on black wax with the rather nice centre circle there. Yeah, this for me has got more of the the sort of punk rock vibe that punk, not punk rock, sorry, that punk grind vibe that you would associate with Abscess, which another band I absolutely adore. For me, this album's probably Chris Reifert at his best, vocally, because it goes through every single, from horrendous banshee style shrieks to the low guttural growls, and I think the only thing he doesn't do is some type of operatic aria in between it all. But yeah, and one of the criticisms I read about this was it's got no direction. You don't know where it's going to go. There's time changes that don't need to be there and stuff. For me, that is probably the biggest selling point of it, because when you're listening to it, you don't know where it's going to go. You know, it can be midway through, and then all of a sudden it's a banger in there. It's the production's not overly polished. I mean, to be fair, no Autopsy one is, but there's like that looseness, and that feeling of just, we're going to do what we want. Hopefully you like it, but if you don't, we aren't that bothered. And again, it's an album that I did know, but until this last fortnight, as with all these, I didn't really spend a lot of time with. This has definitely jumped up on my list of Autopsy if I was to do a ranking. This has changed dramatically in the last couple of weeks from where it probably would have been if I'd done it 6 months ago or something like that. But yeah, it's just absolutely cracking album. And again, I have got a slight Autopsy bias, but yeah, so that is Autopsy and their Acts of the Unspeakable. Now, the next band, and the last one I want to show, is a band that I can listen to day in, day out, constantly, but I don't really have a go-to record as I did with the rest of them, just because the catalogue's so varied, and it all depends on what day of the week it is, what mood I'm in, who I want to listen to. So, the band in question is Death, and I've picked individual thought patterns, and for some reason, thinking through, this is probably one I've spent the least amount of time with. This came out in 1993 originally, their 5th full length. This is the 2021 reissue. Obviously we know Death are from Florida. Now, I've always said, if you've watched my channel before, I am not the biggest prog metal fan. In fact, the only prog metal I own is things like this and probably Seventh Son of a Seventh Son or something like that. You know, I'm not a fan of bands like Dream Theater and stuff. And it's not that there's anything wrong with them, it's just something that doesn't, it's never really floated my boat, as it were. I think this is one of the Awful Butterfly. Yeah, I mean, look at that, it's horrendous. Luckily it sounds fantastic. But yeah, for some reason, it's probably because it's Chuck, and I just think he's amazing. But for me, the biggest thing about this record, and I'm not sure if it's something that's a prog type of, what's the word, you know, something that prog labels do. The production on this has all 3 instruments and the vocals seem to be on a par with each other in the mix. You know, there's nothing, the guitars aren't more prominent, the drums aren't more prominent, the bass isn't more prominent. It just, everything seems to, I was going to say sit on the same level, but obviously it's still got the layers, you can still hear all the differences. But I think what Chuck's done, getting Gene Hoglan and Steve DiGiorgio on this is more about, for me, the virtuosity of the 3 guys together, rather than really clever intrinsic riffs and stuff like that. The riffs and the melodies on this, I would say, at the risk of being absolutely slaughtered, are quite simple sounding, but the there's no denying that the talent on show is just, you know, it's otherworldly. It's never ever going to be, I would never say this is my definitive Death album. You know, if somebody said to me, oh, I want to listen to get into Death, what do I listen to first? Again, I would probably say Leprosy. Mind saying that on the next day I might say Symbolic, so it's a bit of a thing. But yeah, again, this is more of this is as close to prog metal as I would ever consider buying. You know, I wouldn't, like I said, bands like Dream Theater and stuff don't interest me in the slightest. Not sure why, it just doesn't fit with me. But yeah, I've really listened to this properly over the last couple of weeks, as with the others, and it's been sort of a refreshing, like relearning an album that you've known for a long time anyway, or listening to it with different ears type thing. You know, it's but yeah, really enjoyed it. So that is Death and their Individual Thought Patterns. So that's it for this one. It's just something, a bit of an idea. I thought, well, we'll start with death metal and maybe do thrash metal or traditional metal, whatever. Because, like I said, I'm sure most of us have got I want to listen to so-and-so band, I'll put so-and-so album on. Just thought I'd change it up a little bit and listen to something else. Hopefully you found something of interest. It'd be interesting to see other people's takes on this actually, you know, if you're like me, sort of, your collection's big enough where you've got too much choice, as it were. I know for a fact there'll be people out there with smaller collections than me that know the records inside out, upside down and backwards, and that's something I'll never ever, I could never ever be accused of. But hey ho, anyway. So, like I said, pop down in the comments, as always. It's always good to interact with people. Hopefully, like I say, if you find something that is interesting, you might consider giving it a thumbs up or a subscription, or tell your grandma and see if she fancies watching an old fart talk about music. The weather is horrendous outside, so it's going to be a day probably listening to music, well, after the football. And look after one another, as always. Enjoy whatever music you're listening to. Enjoy whatever genre of music you're listening to. Maybe change it up a little bit, and instead of going for your normal record, pick something different out of the catalogue. And we'll be back with maybe probably a black metal update. I haven't done one of them for a few days. So we'll leave it there. Anyway, chatting shit. And until next time, cheers.